Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit. We have an exciting guest with us today and an exciting topic. Rich Batchelor is going to be here talking to us about change. Welcome, Rich. Welcome to the summit.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This is going to be such an exciting topic. Building blocks for not anyone, but new PMO leaders, empowering a culture for change. Now, isn't that a surprise when you're setting up a PMO? Before I hand it over to you, Rich, I do want to go ahead and tell the audience a bit about you. Rich Batchelor, President and Chief Change Agent at Capillary Consulting. Rich has been successfully delivering change for over 25 years. His consulting practice has seen him work with organizations across all parts of the globe. His legacy includes developing the change delivery model for the UK government and being a founding member of the Association of Change Management Professionals, where he was founding president of the Toronto chapter for 6 years. He has a master's in change management and is a certified Lego serious play facilitator and workshop designer. He's also certified in project management, process improvement, facilitation, HR, coaching, counseling, and psychotherapy. His presentation delivery is known for its passion and direct challenges to the audience. He enjoys the opportunity to disrupt traditional thinking, bring humor to the learning space, and enable curiosity to take control of the change space for everyone. Welcome, Rich. Over to you.
Thank you, Hussein. I'm very pleased to be here and to share that passion and enthusiasm I have for the change space with everybody. It's always scary when you hear back your own bio because you realize, there's a lot of change in that. So my pre-warning to everybody today is there's a lot of change in this conversation that we're going to go through today. But I am going to be challenged and I am going to be pushing out things to people as we go through and making you think and making you perhaps have personal challenges yourself as you go through, thinking about what you could do to be a successful new PMO leader, or maybe if you're supporting or mentoring a new PMO leader, what you should be thinking about in that way as well. And the culture of change piece is going to come throughout, because that's kind of what a new PMO leader or any PMO leader is responsible for, is developing that culture that supports change in any organization. So let's get going. Let me bring some stuff in to start thinking about things. So I have a question, my first challenge to push out to you. What does a project management office do? Does it manage projects? Does it manage project managers? Or maybe it manages project management? I throw this out here because whenever I have conversations with people about what a PMO is supposed to be, all of these words get thrown around and people kind of go, oh, well, it does the project stuff. It brings all projects together. Or it's where all the project managers are kind of looked after from, or where the kind of design and structure for the project management methodology that our organization uses is going to be designed from. But I throw this out there because for me, my focus is around the people of the PMO and how those people are being led, and whether they're project managers or other project support workers within that PMO, and the way they connect to the whole strategy of the organization and what it's going to change and deliver going forward. Then I want to talk a lot more about the style of the people side, because I talk about change management, and change management is really about people and the way people go through change. So, leading change, leading a PMO, kind of similar things. People that lead a PMO, whether you're new to this, experienced in doing it, or maybe recalibrating yourself in your role as a leader of a PMO, you have responsibilities for interacting with people within the PMO, outside the PMO. You know, who doesn't get touched at some point in any organization by something that's happening in the PMO? You've got external corporate relationships that you have to do. You know, frequently you're out there dealing with people to purchase things, acquire things, work with externals, whatever. Maybe we label it as external stakeholder relationship management or other fancy things. But there's that element of corporate relationship management. But underlying this, and even though it's perhaps the bottom tier, I look at that as being the foundation tier. There's a strategic understanding requirement. Everything that happens in the PMO needs to be done to explain why the organization exists. Every activity that's being put there and working their way through the PMO is there because it links to the strategy. If it doesn't link to the strategy, then why the heck are you doing it? So questions to consider taking on leadership of a PMO. What's expected by me and my organization? What is expected by me by any team or staff that I have responsibility for? What do I expect of myself? What do I do now? What do I do next? What am I going to be doing tomorrow and the day after and going forward? Think about what support mechanisms are available to me. People, tools, structures, technologies. And I'm not answering these questions here because for me, the power of thinking comes from knowing the questions, not necessarily jump into the first answer. Ponder on the questions. Think about this as being almost your starter point, your kick in on what you need to do going in to be a PMO leader and doing the activity that's responsible for you. Maybe it sounds a little bit operational, but it's actually about getting things done, and that's what needs to happen. So think about the strategic element. Big thing for me, time and time again, is explaining why we do this. And this is what comes in from my change management background. Explaining to people why we are doing things, why we need this to happen, why the heck these things are changing. All of this side of stuff is really about the strategy. And then linking to that is who's going to actually do this stuff? Who in the PMO, who in the organization, who that connects to the PMO is going to take responsibility, ownership, and accountability? And what in the end is going to be delivered? But beyond these why, who, and what questions, fundamentally, how the heck are we going to do this? How does this happen? So let's think about this going forward. This is about the culture of change piece. This is about how we actually deliver changes in organizations by empowering people and developing really those key points that need to happen, those key learning curves, those key educational elements that people really need to experience inside an organization, so that it's not about change being done to people, it's about change being done with people. And the PMO taking the lead to actually, I wouldn't even say organize and plan those changes, but to enable those changes to take place. And enabling those changes is about building that culture of change also within the PMO and the people supporting that as they go out to the organization. So I've kind of put 7 randomish labeled blocks on the screen. And I'm going to talk to each of these in turn, because for me, these are those fundamental building blocks that we mentioned in the title of this presentation that really relate to creating that culture of change. So we've got curiosity and innovation, continuous learning, resilience, change agents, strategic alignment, successful communications, and change leadership. And I'm going to take my time to go through. Some I'll talk to a little bit more than others, but we're going to really unpack each of these elements as I share with you my own insights and my own experiences to help you build these building blocks so you can successfully lead your PMO. So let's think about change. What is the very first reaction to any change? You go out to the organization, you say, we're going to bring in a new IT system, or we're going to change the way we process something. We're going to actually look at the way we do things in a different way. And typically the first reaction that comes back to that change looks something like this. Edvard Munch's The Scream. So I love this picture. I love this painting because it is so representative of the typical reaction that you have in an organization when change comes along. And when you go and you're looking at your PMO setup, the people that you want to be supporting you in it, the people you don't want to be supporting in it, you start talking about the things that you need to change to build that culture. And those building blocks that we're going to talk about shortly start to come into play. But how many times do you have people screaming? Maybe not actually physically screaming, but maybe there's a little bit about putting their hands over their ears in a kind of metaphysical space so that it's not actually real, but they just don't want to hear about it. And yet that's part of the culture that you need to be getting away from and encouraging people to take forward. So let's start off with change leadership, because we're talking about leading a PMO. We're actually talking about what is the role to be the new leader, to be bringing together people. What do we mean by change leadership? And it's an interesting one for me, and before I go into this little piece here, because I talk about change management frequently. And we get confused with change management, change leadership, and things like this. And for me, leadership and change are intrinsically connected. And when we talk about change leadership, we're actually talking about the difference between management and leadership. And again, I love this actual cartoon coming up here. And I hope you can have a moment, and I'll make sure I talk through this to give you enough time to kind of go through and view this picture. On the left-hand side, we have the typical activities of a manager. On the right-hand side, we have the typical behaviors of a leader. And that in itself is important, because behaviors versus actions. Leadership is about behaviors, about how things are done, the way we do things. Culture. Actions are operational things. Managers deliver operations. You know, and we all know great project managers who get stuff done. They're great at getting the actions, great at getting things delivered. But we want more than that in the leader of a PMO. It's not just about getting things done. It's actually about having behavioral aspects that encourage a culture that actually supports changes that are being brought in. So, a personal favorite author of mine, John Cotter, done lots of stuff, he researched lots of things in change management. But he defined change leadership as being about the driving forces, visions, and processes that actually fuel large-scale transformation. And there's a couple of points I want to pick up on in that definition that I think are really important here. Driving forces. So leadership and change leadership is about drive. A vision is part of a strategy. We often talk about the strategy being anchored by the vision and mission statements of an organization. And large-scale transformation. Large-scale transformation is not something that's happening in a little pocket inside the organization. It's something that's happening across the whole of the organization. And that's where the PMO has that oversight, that idea that they can see across the whole organization. So for me, when we're talking about change in a PMO, it's definitely about change being done as a leadership driver. So looking at the piece I put at the bottom here, kind of helping to summarize, yet strangely it's got more words than the actual piece I had before. But hopefully it helps you to actually think about what we mean by change leadership. It's much more wider, further, deeper, broader than change management. It carries the same fundamentals of working with people, but it's got that much broader strategic piece. It's actually about leading change at a strategic level in organizations. which means not doing singular projects, but understanding programs and the strategy of the organization being delivered through multiple delivery points. So how do we do this? We need successful communications. And a little comment from me that I have here. I've frequently had conversations with people about what's the change manager do? And for a change manager, they often think, well, all you do is just send out communications. Well, that's not an untruth. There's a lot of communications that go out. And communications for me is kind of core to the whole change management piece. But I've tagged the word successful communications here because you want those communications to be successful. You don't just want it to be something that happens and it's like, somebody said something somewhere, but I don't know what it was. This is about a communication that's successful. So it's foundation stone here. We're talking fundamentals. But change needs to be done from inside out, and communications needs to be done from the inside out. That means that communications is not about throwing things out there and hoping that something sticks. It's about actually talking with people inside the organization. And when we link this to people in a PMO, people overseeing strategic delivery of PMO activities, it's not about telling people what's happening. It's about talking with people about what's happening, about understanding truly how that's going to affect them. And the only way that can happen is with successful communications. And that includes talking to, talking with, and listening. It's a two-way street. Now, a few little tips for you that I'm just going to throw out here. Maybe help you when you're thinking about communications. Because it's really one of the things I often get asked the most about is how do I make a communication successful? So for me, communications needs to be 3 C's. Consistent, clear, and concise. How many times have you been there reading through an email that goes on and on and on? You know, you've gone to paragraph 4 or 5 and you're just ready to switch off. Is that really a successful communication? No, it's not. Make it concise. If it doesn't fit on one page, you're writing too much. It doesn't give you any extra gold stars or points of credit or whatever else you want to use to actually have more information than you need to have. But remember to make the content clear. So small words, simple words, easy to understand words. Nobody is going to love you for giving them the 4 or 5 syllable long word that could be said in one simple 4-letter or 5-letter word. Keep it simple. And that whole consistency piece, that's really about making sure that the same message goes to everybody. So make sure that you're actually sharing a consistent messaging with people. It's not about telling people what you think they want to hear. It's about telling everybody the same thing is happening. So when you go out and you talk about what needs to happen and you're building up a team or, you know, a group of people, and maybe some of those are dotted line people and some of those are straight line, solid line people in your organization that's going to be working with you on a PMO. Talk to them using the 3 C's about what's happening and how you want the culture for change to be supported. And then think about lowest common denominator. You may have a team that you're building. You may have people in your organization that have a whole range of experiences. Some been there for many years, some been there for only a few years, some been there for only a few weeks maybe. Make sure you talk to the lowest common denominator in that group of people. Don't talk to the middle point. We so often make the mistake of trying to average out the level of knowledge in a group and talking to that midpoint. Yet talk to that midpoint is a really big mistake, because if that's all you do, then you're alienating half of your audience. So if you've got a group of people that are being there to set up and help and support whatever, and some of them have been there for many years, some of them have been there for a few years, don't talk to those that have been there around the 5-year point and above, because anybody who's been there for less than 5 years, they're just going to switch off, disengage with you. And then my last piece here I have on this, the inverse pyramid. And you might call it a triangle, 3D pictures, whatever you want to do, maybe not the strongest point on a flat screen. But what this is about is that the closer to the action, the closer to the delivery point, the more pointed the information needs to be for people. Think about this in a way that if you're talking strategically with people, that person is only interested in the bigger picture. So they're interested in the wide piece at the top. And yet the person who's at the front line, who's actually talking to the stakeholder, delivering the new piece of IT equipment, whatever it may be, they need to know what plugs in where. They need to know how things actually connect together. So I call it the inverse pyramid because you think of a pyramid as being representing an organization with the top being the chief and the bottom being the people closest to the work. And you kind of invert the breadth of information they need based on that. So a few kind of helpful tips, hopefully hints to take forward with communication. And to be honest with you, I think those are good practices for communication, no matter what you're doing. Yes, with change, but yes, with anything that you need to communicate to ensure that people are informed about what's happening. Then there's the elements of preemptive strike. I am a strong believer in telling people as soon as you know what's going on, because that helps to prepare the organization for what's going to take place. Getting people ready for the change, or change readiness as we like to use the label, is about telling people as soon as possible to both emotionally and physically prepare themselves for the change that's coming. Just think about yourself if you've ever been faced with a change. Did you want to know sooner or later about the change? Even though it might have been a shock to the system, the sooner you knew about it, the better. And if you've got responsibility for sharing communication with a group of people, no matter who that group of people might be, and you want to share that information with them, the sooner you get there, the better. Because if you leave it too long, the rumor mill will start creating their own ideas amongst that group of people. And then you'll spend twice as long communicating, because you have to unwind the one before you can wind on what's actually happening. And during that all, the trust level is probably dropped. Early, preemptive communications, full transparency is going to help. So I'm going to kind of go into another stack here, because we've kind of talked a little bit more about activities and action stuff in those first 3 building blocks. Now I want to talk about resilience. And the reason I want to talk about resilience is because I like to connect resistance and resilience together. And if we look at what does each achieve, resilience versus resistance, whenever you bring a change in, one of the first conversations I have of anything new coming along, anything new being developed, anybody taking on a new role is, are people going to resist me? Are people going to push back against me? And this whole energy consumption that goes into people resisting me and what that looks like. But for me, building resilience is a way of preventing resistance. Because when you build resilience, people kind of go with the flow. They're a little bit more easygoing when it comes to new things coming along. Because resistance makes people go a bit crazy. So you might feel you're pulling your hair out or being sucker punched all the time from those resistors. But resilience prevents the pain and the hurt from these things and enables you to keep calm and actually work your way through what's happening. And encouraging others around you to build their resilience prevents them from turning resistant when you give things or make changes for the first time that affects them. Because if you do that, they're actually more likely to feel, okay, it's new, it's different, but I've got the strength and tenacity to cope with this. Increased resilience is about acceptance and capability. And increasing that resilience reduces the resistance. And part of that resistance reduction as well is explanation and inclusion, which goes back to what I talked about on the communication stuff, because that's really where the explanation and inclusion stuff comes in. But building the resilience through acceptance is really getting people to realize a change happens. There's no way you can avoid it. It's going to take place. So the sooner you learn to live with it, not against it, the easier it's going to be on your energy. And what about capability? Capability is an interesting one for me because at its heart is about understanding, which is really about education. So getting people to, watch things like this, follow along with the whole range of educational experiences, really helps people to build capability for knowing what's expected of them and how best to navigate that responsibility that might be coming their way. Being a change agent. So change agents is something that's very, very close to my heart. As was mentioned in my introductory bio, I did a lot of work for UK government, and that's where this accent comes from. So part of the work I did with the UK government was developing a change delivery model that used change agents. And over the years, I've successfully done a lot of work with a lot of organizations developing change agent presence. And what do I mean by a change agent? Well, I kind of take the definition that's given from the Oxford English Dictionary for agent. And this goes back a number of years to when I first created this idea of a change agent. Because it's about people taking two-way ownership and responsibility to support, enable, manage, deliver, really be conduits, yet supportive conduits for change in an organization. So I've got 6 bullet points here that cover what is in the definition. And I'm going to not read them out to you because the time I've spent on this, you've probably been able to read what's on screen yourself. But I'm going to highlight the elements that are important here. So we talk about somebody who can act upon someone or something. So this is somebody who within an organization does something to somebody or something. So that person is responsible for making things happen. And they have a particular direction, a purpose. They have a strategy that they're following for the organization's purpose and changes that they need to take place. They cause something to be a change in process or just a change of thing, a replacement, something like that happening. And they're comfortable doing the things necessary to make that happen. They represent somebody at a senior level in the organization. Typically, the sponsor of a project, a program, a change sponsor within the organization, a strategic leader often in the organization, and they act on their behalf. And when they're acting on that person's behalf, they are able to engage with the general populace of the organization to get them to understand what it means to be going through this change. And what I really like this actual definition is that last line there where it says negotiations or transactions. This person is not just a mouthpiece. This person is somebody who has engaged conversation with people. They get and understand the change that the project's bringing in, whatever the initiative is that's coming along. They get it, and they can have a conversation with people about how that's going to affect them. Not just tell them, that's the way it is, deal with it. Because all that happens when you do that conversation is that previous slide we had, the pushback comes. So a change agent is really about somebody who facilitates two-way engagement about change with the general populace. And I often look at, say, somebody who is taking on a leadership role for the first time, and they are responsible for replacing somebody who's perhaps moved out or setting up something that's never existed before. And they are really playing the part of change agent because they are engaging with all those new connection points in the organization for this new role, this new position, to support them and make it real for them. But also answer their questions, explain what it means, and help them to effectively buy in to this role and what this role means to them and the relationship with that role. Change agents are typically, I would say, not full-time. They have a day job to do. You do occasionally get a small number of change agents in an organization that are full-time-ish majority of the time. And, you know, we all know these people who might be labeled as the full-time change manager, or, you know, I would say a lot of project managers have that change agent role as well, where they're full-time on one project delivering it. But there's often people who have some of the time responsibilities for enabling change to take place. And because of that, there's this kind of balancing act that needs to go on for the role of change agent and the day job. And these are what I call my level 2, some of the time, change agents. You know, 2-3 afternoons a week, they can spend time dedicated to change. And then you have your arm's length stuff. And I'm not going to spend much time on that. But you know, there are some people who are just like infrequent visitors to the change space. And they will come in for a random particular project that's happening that just needs them for a few hours here and there. And they kind of engage with you for that short period of time. So you've kind of got these 3 structures, but they're fundamentally part of the network that needs to take place within an organization to support change, where everybody who's playing the role of change agent is connected to each other and can turn to each other for support. And this, for me, is one of the fundamentals, again, on why I list these things as building blocks for a new PMO leader, or I would say even a PMO leader newly shaping their role. They need to have a support network they can turn to who understands the change they're trying to bring about in the organization. And that support network is somebody they can talk to, or some people they can talk to, about different aspects of their role and how that connects together. Curiosity and innovation kind of come into me as underlying competencies for change agents. And if we're talking about a change agent being that person who's got a role and responsibility at a strategic level, then they need to really understand how to question what's happening and how to go forward with it. When we look back over history, there's always been innovation, inventions, different things coming along. You know, the wheel in the first place was an innovation. Fire, maybe, if you want to go back that way. And we so often in this day and age in organizations are bringing in new technologies, and managing that response to that technology coming in, that innovation, and it might be an innovative process that doesn't involve technology, that can actually help people to go through it if we've got these other building blocks in place. Talking about the resilience, talking about change agents, talking about communications. By the time we're bringing in this culture and innovation, people are comfortable with what it is that's coming, because we're now really solidifying this culture through these building blocks. And for those of you that might be curious, this is actually a picture of something referred to as the Luddites. And it's a word that we often use these days to refer to somebody who's anti-technology or anti-modernization. And just to put a bit of clarity on it, the Luddites were people back in the UK when the printing press first came in that rebelled against this automation of printing techniques. And it's interesting that their location and where they came from has been transferred into a reference point for people who are anti-technology. But, you know, technology has been around for so long that it's part of the way people think and part of the way people breathe. And we probably all know people who are maybe a few years younger than ourselves who seem to get on with technology so much better. And this is where you want to almost have this mindset of behavioral openness towards a culture of innovation inside an organization. For me, I think innovation and in turn curiosity is really about how you learn what happens. You know, I love this particular quote here from Arthur Ward. It's curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning. And if we think about it in terms of curiosity and innovation, where curiosity is the questioning, if you don't question something, you'll never learn. So if you're not willing to pose questions to your change agent network around you, then you will never learn from them. And that applied curiosity to your network, to your organization, is what allows innovation to come through for you. And that takes me to continuous learning. No surprise there. I use the word learning over training because for me, learning is a wider, a bigger grouping of what's happening when people are understanding something new. Training tends to be when you deliver information to somebody and they try and remember it to use it at a later time. For me, learning encompasses that and many other ways. You might watch the way somebody else does something. You might get your hands dirty doing something. That's all about learning. And an organization that has continuous learning at its heart is truly an organization that can actually be fundamentally at its heart embracing change. Because learning is about something new coming about, and we become able to use it. As Peter Senge says here, through learning we recreate ourselves, but through learning we become able to do something you were never able to do. So if you were to have a culture of change, you're actually talking about the culture being about doing things that you didn't do before. And it may not even be actions, it may be the behaviors, it may be the way of doing things that come into place here. And then I'm going to almost put a bow around it all that I've been talking about with strategic alignment. And I've kind of hinted at this with most of the stuff I've talked about. And it takes me back to this great guy that I've got on screen here, Simon Sinek. And he talks about start with the why and look up his TED talk, have a view on the stuff that he's done. He's made a whole career out of a viral TED talk that took forward his insights. And I've been fortunate to have a conversation with him and learn some insights from presentations and stuff that he's done. But starting with the why is that fundamental. Why the heck are we doing this? Explain to people why we are doing things. Knowing why your role exists. Why is your role as a PMO leader so fundamental and important to the success of the organization? It's because it's strategically aligned with the purpose and focus of the organization. So slightly more structured and ordered set of bricks now that I've talked my way through to bring about that culture of change inside the organization. But as we talk today, I'm really focusing this on what it means to be a PMO leader for the new time, for a first time, for a time that's never existed before in some organizations. And lining up these pieces is a holistic way of building that culture of change. And why is this so important? Because this is probably a bit like that screen picture, the frightened statement that goes through your head. My organization has just asked me to lead the PMO. Holy ... Fill in your own blanks afterwards. And what am I saying that you need to think about? Well, obviously don't panic to begin with. Get a strategic understanding of your role and how is that going to connect and build the culture. Because meeting the people and understanding the existing culture and how much movement you might need to move to take that forward to be an enabling culture that aligns with the strategy and can deliver what needs to be delivered is important. Because you need to focus on what the organization needs to have and what needs to happen to deliver that. I have to throw in my little change management spiel in here, because for me, too many times, particularly in the project management field, we focus on delivering a thing and hoping that people will just use it or do it. So bring in your change management side and bring this in to actually play with a space where people feel comfortable and can actually deliver. And finally, enjoy the experience. It's going to be fun. It's going to be hard work, but think about your building blocks. Think about how you're going to develop that. Think about how you're going to actually excel as your role as a PMO leader, and you can really go far. Thank you. That's my piece. I'm going to hand back to Hussein now to see if there's any questions that you want to throw at me, comments, observations, or otherwise. I've got all my contact details up on screen here, and I'm always happy to connect with people. I probably regret sometimes the amount of people I say yes to, but I find it a fascinating conversation I have with people. So you can look up stuff on the company, you can email me, my cell number's there. I tweet a heck of a lot, sometimes quite opinionated stuff. And if you're interested in the change agent stuff that I was talking about, which really encompass a lot of these fundamental building blocks, then you can go to our website, www.certifiedchangeagent.com, and you can look up stuff and information and reach out to come and attend one of our workshops. And it is a formal certification program that's recognized by a number of formal organizations like PMO, SHRM, HRPA, and ACMP, the association that I helped starting up earlier on. So that's it from me. Back to Hussein. Any questions you'd like to throw at me?
Rich, thank you so much for that. That was great. It was a fascinating presentation, and thank you once again for it.
Thank you.
And yes, of course, I definitely have a bunch of questions.
No, you don't say. You don't say.
As I'm sure quite a few of our listeners and viewers have as well, but on their behalf, I would like to go ahead and shoot a couple of questions for you. One thing, that, and I'm glad you mentioned the whole difference between change management versus leadership, right? And that's the difference between a manager and a leader in general as well. And one thing that I'm sure a lot of people are very curious about is, what would you tell someone who's looking to shift their focus from change management to change leadership?
Great question. And I'm going to kind of dissect the words a little bit to answer this for you. So this is where I play with the phrase change management in its first place. A lot of people read the words change management and they assume it's about managing change because it's got the management side to it. And it's a really sucky phrase because of that, because it makes it sound very tactical, very, operational, like we saw in those pictures there where we looked at the actual manager versus leader piece. But all the same, change management tends to be applied methodologies and structures and maybe a little bit more holistic process, but there's definitely a way of doing things that's focused on change management. Whereas change leadership, I think, is anchored on that leadership part, the secondary part. And apart from change leadership being akin to change management, just at a higher strategic level, I think there's much more of that leadership behavior piece. And for me, I think when somebody is looking to take on, leadership over management, change leadership over change management, it's about having an improvement in their emotional intelligence, self-awareness, that type of stuff, to understand not necessarily what they can deliver and do, but how they present themselves, and developing a behavioral approach that engages, drives, and influences others in ways that is supportive and empowering. I've had a recent conversation with somebody around a similar line that talked about it being the difference between planning and organizing, which you would perhaps associate with the change management side, and empowering and enabling is much more change leadership. So for me, if you want to move from one to the other, it's almost about getting the mirror up and talking about what do I understand about myself and building my softer skills, my behavioral skills, my people skills, all that interaction piece that needs to focus a lot more when we talk about change leadership.
Got it. So, it's definitely a major shift in focus on a lot of different facets. Essentially a graduation, if you will, right? You're literally graduating from the concept of management to a concept of leadership.
Yeah, I think it's very much that almost evolutionary growth piece that takes place. Much like in an organization where you might move from being sort of tactical to a blended tactical strategic to becoming strategic. That's kind of the way I see that sort of difference of levels going through there.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense, Rich. Thanks for that. Rich, one last question that I have for you. This whole concept of resilience, that's just so wonderful, because every time you think about stakeholders, every time you think about dealing or negotiating with sponsors or other people that you have to work through with, you're always talking about resistance, right? And not talking about resilience. And that's such a wonderful difference between the two. And this point just resonated so much with me. And so one thing that I want to ask you is, what can PMO leaders do to coach their own teams? So coach their teams of analysts, coordinators, project managers, portfolio managers, whoever have you, to build resilience within the stakeholders. So how can PMO leaders coach their teams to build the resilience within their stakeholders?
Whoa. So one thing I will say from the outset, when you're talking about stakeholders, is don't look at developing resistance management plans. Don't use the resistance word. Is start working and view stakeholders as having reactions or responses. Don't use the resistance word, because if you actually have that in, you start to encourage people to anchor on that word. And then I would say you want to build from what that might look like in terms of how they engage, how they view what's going on, what you're doing, into building that, again, unfortunately, it goes back to a bit of softer skills, behavioral stuff. But again, resilience building is about understanding almost your own energy consumption for how things affect you. So think about it in ways that, working with a stakeholder to be prepared, to know that this is going to be happening. Don't wait until the last minute. Too often we get caught up in thinking, I can't talk to a stakeholder about this project or this thing happening until I know the whole story. No, go out there and talk to them early on and help them to understand what that means to them and how they're going to react back to it. And work with that stakeholder in a way that helps them to build their own personal response mechanisms and recognize it in themselves. And then the third piece I will put into this is about understanding that resilience is not a constant. Your level of resilience will go up and down. So talking with a stakeholder, you can reflect on your own journey and talk to them about how you feel about the change and how the work you're doing is going to put you through pieces of higher trauma or lower trauma that's going to push your resilience levels down or up, and saying to them that you recognize that they're going to go through this same, roller coaster ride of resilience that's going to make them want to push back at times. But working with them to help them get to the end point by supporting them to understand what their feelings are, what it means to them, and how they are likely to respond is important to help them building their own techniques for managing that response away from resistance into a much more resilient mindset.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Rich. Again, everyone, that was Rich Batchelor for you. You have everything that you have out here to get in touch with him. You have his website, his email, his cell phone number as well.
Yeah.
And if you want to learn more about how to become a certified change agent so you can effectively make the right moves to get the buy-in you need for your PMO, get in touch with Rich right here at www.certifiedchangeagent.com. Thanks for being part of the summit, Rich.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.